Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. All righty, we'll give it 2 more minutes and we will begin. I hope you have had a great day. All righty, I have a cousin joining me to help me facilitate and ask questions, and we know how that is with this technology trying to get on. So it is now 6 o'clock. And my name is Karen Bradford. I am here for our author discussion on a book that I penned back. I guess now it's been 2 years. It came out on last September, and it is Chrysalis, Coded to Thrive. I know we have it below in the comments or below the screen, and you have availability to it in Amazon. And so I'm thankful that I was asked to be able to share. It's not your typical, I guess I don't think it's your typical rethinking topic. There she is. Hey, Kim. Um, your typical rethinking church ministry topic. But then I got to thinking about it while I was walking the dog a little while ago between sessions, and I was like, well, why not? You know, it's a story of co-grief. We're going through or coming out of pandemic where we have experienced different types of grief. And so how ironic for us to be I guess in an incubator or some type of holding place, if you will, for 15 months, and then having to reestablish ourselves coming out. That's exactly what my book is about. My husband and I have been married for 20 years, so this is a story of restoration and healing and transformation. Thinking about your marriage ministries, thinking about your women's ministries, that's where this book would be most applicable in rethinking church. So that's the bridge across to connect the summit to my book. So many thanks to Reverend LaKesha Womack for the opportunity. It's been an amazing experience this week. And so again, thankful for the opportunity to share with you guys. So in short, this is a memoir. This memoir is about the last 5 years, literally, of my life. So December 16th, 2021, my daughter leaves to go on a choir trip, actually up to Maryland, where we live now. How ironic. And, you do your typical kisses, goodbyes. I dropped her off to school, which I normally typically don't do because my husband does it. And I told Noelle, I said, all right, I said, when you get there, or on the trip, like many moms do, show, remember who you are. That's what I said. Remember who you are and remember whose you are, because that's what my parents taught me. We kissed. She went on to school. She texted me after she got to the friend's house, got there, got settled. And I, for whatever reason, text her because she left a choir shoe. And I said, okay. I took a picture and said, you left your shoe. Tell the mother that you need to stop and get some black shoes. I didn't hear from her, which is not necessarily different. It was just like, oh, okay, well, I guess they're still riding. Well, my husband comes in the door Saturday morning about 10 o'clock with our senior pastor at the time. And if anybody knows, when you have a relative coming to your house with the pastor, and I'm a PK, you already know somebody's died. So he said, I have something to tell you. And I said, is it Noel? He was like, yeah, Noel died in a car accident. So within 24 hours of seeing my daughter, dropping her off to school, here I am standing on a Saturday morning. My husband was at Bible study, teaching Bible study, and we are faced with the most traumatic experience of our lives. Noel was bright. Noel, she was your typical bright student. She was in ministry. She had just preached her sermonette at age 12, maybe not more than 6 months before that. And here we are standing, having lost Noel to a car accident. So of course you go through those typical funeral procedures. I'm at home. I decided not to go back to work. I was on my 6-week leave, and that was about 45 days after Noel's funeral. I received 2 letters at my job, confused, because the letters were, somebody doesn't know you when you read your name on an envelope that's like your name on Facebook. So I know whoever this came from really didn't know me, because I don't just go around using my full name anywhere. I use it there, of course, like most of us do because of social media. It ended up being 2 letters from 2 women who admitted to having an affair with my husband. Told me, yeah, we were at the funeral, and what? We saw your daughter. Oh, well. Flabbergasted. I was like, what? I was crazy. So I'm sitting here within 45 days of 2 events. And what this book does is really describes more of my grief process, if you will. How I moved, how I was ushered into the Chrysalis, and how I went through different changes in the Chrysalis to come out thriving, sitting here today. So that co-grieving process, I wasn't not only grieving my daughter's death, but I was also grieving the death of my marriage at the time. So I'm doing both of these grief processes at the same time, trying to move forward. And here we are coming out of the pandemic doing the very same thing. And so that's why I guess I decided perhaps to submit to share, is because we're all going through some sort of co-grief experience right now, whether it's our jobs and the loss of childcare, whether it's the actual physical death of a person, and the physical, we think about rethinking church, the physical, the death of our churches as we know them, right? How do we move through and get to the other side, so where we are actually back to a place that we can actually soar and be successful in God. So that's kind of the premise behind the book. And I really used not only the 5-stage grieving process, but what was so eye-opening for me was the transformative bereavement process that I just happened to find by Googling. You get so many books when you're going through anything, and I'm one of those self-help book people. So I was like trying to find books to help me grieve the loss of a child as a mom and all this type of thing. And I found this one book, and it talked about how to move past being stuck in grief. Like, we don't want to live our lives stuck. And I didn't want to live my life stuck in grief. Ironically, let me put a pin here and say, my mom went through the very exact same thing. At that point, it was about 7 years before that. So we lost my sister. She went in to go get her wisdom teeth taken out. She didn't come back out. The dentist didn't have his emergency equipment. They put her under. They didn't have the equipment to bring her back. So we lost April and Noel. April and Noel both had their last night together before we lost April. So how ironic that they're together in heaven. But I knew I had my mom to fall back on. But what I didn't want to do was be in a state of or cycles of grief for the rest of my life. I didn't want to just merely exist in life. I really wanted to get back to a place where I could actually, we have a son. I got to be able to function for my child, my other child. So how do I move through? And so this transformative grief process really helped me to actually look within and find my code. So that brings us to the subtitle of the book, Coded to Thrive. Because when I sat in my house for 18 months, you know who didn't come to see me? My pastor didn't come to see me. Because unfortunately, in our situation, the pastor at that time was a part of the let's keep it quiet and covered up and not help get us back to where we needed to be. I didn't get help from the women's ministry and the women that were close to me in the church. It was, we don't want to be apart. We're going to keep you over there. You've been through. So I lost people who I lost a circle that I thought I had, like the very circle that we would run to get support. We're in church now, we're in church. My husband's assistant pastor. I'm like a leader in the women's ministry. But when these letters came out, we were ghosted. We were all alone. And I called it, I think, maybe in my session earlier today or in another session today. I told my high school students what I used to teach. I was naked in the supermarket. I had no friends. I had no people. Even some of my family became mute because they didn't know what to say. But we're supposed to be Christians. We're supposed to be Christ-like. We're supposed to have a word. But nobody was there. So I found myself being by myself, having to look within myself, to examine myself. Because at this point, I was going to have to do this on my own. So what was I going to do? And this transformative process, bereavement process, is the 5-stage process. First, of being angry at accepting it, you're in denial, those 5 steps. But then, and I'm trying to, Becker, her last name is Becker. She's a thought leader in grief, and I'm trying to think of her first name, but it's Becker. The last name is Becker, and she talks about how do you return to a sense of normalcy after grief. Then how do you make that bridge after you return to normalcy? How do you make that bridge so that you can reconnect and then create? And so that's how I moved through talking about my process, realizing that, I was a 5th generation wife. So all I know is marriage. So yeah, I could have walked away, but I also know that's still a small voice, right? So I wasn't going to, I tried, but it didn't work. Tried to walk away, didn't work. And so I got still. And I said, well, you know what? I can't walk away until I put 100% into my marriage, because this didn't happen on its own. And so as I began to work through my coding, how I was created, figuring out Karen, re-examining who I was, then I had to make the decision to how do I reconnect? How do I reconnect to being a wife, being a mom? At that time I was a director in a school district. So how do I get back to who I was at my core? Who I was professionally, how I developed. Do I even want to be in that anymore? The answer was no. One of the quotes I put in the book from one of the Greek books I read was, it said, the life you knew before the death of your loved one is not the life you will have after your loved one. And can I tell you, my life is, that statement is so very true. Not only do we not live in the same city or state, which is our hometown, we live in a totally different district. I'm not even doing that same job anymore. I mean, life is completely different, but I found my life's calling, if you will. And that was what I really appreciated about the transformative bereavement process, is not only grieving to grieve the loss, but how do you heal and move forward? And so this next book that's coming out of this memoir is going to call Heal Well, because that's what I've been saying for the last 6 months is that I chose to heal well, but how did I heal well? So I'll be digging into how I healed, but being able to come out of a grief process, a traumatic event, if you will, 2 traumatic events, and being able to still be positive, to still have hope, to still have hope in the church, I still have that desire to want to serve, not only in marriage ministry and women's ministry, because I know at its core what it's like to feel rejected, to not get support. We thankfully went out and got a Christian therapist. So we are thankfully, my husband and I, healed and whole and back together. Thank the Lord, because I know that there are marriages who, for whatever their personal reasons, choose not to go that direction. And so I take the reader through a very descriptive walk of how I parceled out, how I transformed. And the framework is, we always hear about the butterfly. We always hear about the caterpillar to the butterfly, but I stay in this middle process of the chrysalis, because it's within this chrysalis that we all have that transformation. The transformation doesn't occur when you're a caterpillar. The caterpillar does not even know that it's going to be a butterfly. It's inside the chrysalis that the actual person, or even when we look at the scientific process, the actual caterpillar goes into the chrysalis, is broken down to its cellular core, and then rebuilt to then form into the butterfly, to come out, to even make that, they say that when the butterfly comes out of the chrysalis, it dries its wings. It now has a new location to soar and then create the next generation. So we're talking about legacy. So that's the trajectory. That's the framework that I take the reader through in talking about my experience with grief. And I kind of coined the term co-grief, because I was going through 2 grief processes simultaneously. It wasn't one after the other. It was at the same time. I had to compartmentalize. So I'll stop here and see if there are any questions. I know that my cousin wanted to do some. We had some things planned, but I want to just pause for a second, see if there are any questions about my book. If there's any particular, based on what I've said, anything that's resonated with you that you want to ask, I'll stop and give license for that now. All right, and Kim, if you can, do you have the those items prepared? Just let me know. So while we're waiting on Kim, I think what was also good about was therapeutic about writing about this book was the opportunity to have one particular pastor who knew of us. He and his wife had gone through some similar situation, but they'd gone through their own trauma. And so they drew us in. And I think about so oftentimes, how do we as the church wrap our arms around marriages that are broken, marriages that are having trouble, marriages that need support. And I know that in my adult life and the ones that I've experienced, whether it's been sessions or conferences, it's always the traditional roles and what you do in the home. But we found that through our process, that was about communication. And I share that in one of the chapters in talking about one of the main questions Dr. John Guns, who is our spiritual covering and father, he and his wife sat us down and said, now that this has happened, Karen, how are you going to pivot? How are you going to, you can't stay stuck in the grief of these women and what has happened. How are you going to pivot to move forward? Because sitting in this place is not going to be the place that's going to provide you with success. Sitting in this place is not going to heal you. And Napoleon, sitting in this place is going to make you bitter. How do you get better? How do you pivot? And so that was one of the questions or statements, the questions that he'd asked that I thought was so profound about our early time of really processing what we've gone through and being able to determine if I really wanted to stay, right? So you ask yourself those questions of, what does this look like for me as I move forward? Does staying require me to give up pieces of myself, or can I remain intact and get better? Here again, that key word of being able to thrive, because so many times we find ourselves in situations where we get stuck in our emotion and we allow that to drive our feelings, and our feelings become based off of emotion, and we're not looking at the entire process. And so I think that that's so very key about grieving and healing. So the ability to heal well. Okay, Kim, I'm ready for the first question. Okay, my thing. Let's see. That's new. Hold on a second. Oh, cool. Let's see. I hit the. Oh, there you are.
Hey.
All right. We were able to bring Kim on. So we're going to kind of transition this into a discussion. And then allow, of course, we're still watching the chat for questions. And so, Kim, what you got for me?
So, I read the book. Yes. I was like, oh, why you didn't call me, girl? No, seriously. I read the book. And so one of the quotes that really, one of the passages that really stuck out to me was in chapter 7 under Coded to Heal. So let me read that real quick. As with physical wounds, we must determine the location of the loss, friendship, relationship, etc. Stop the emotional bleeding that leaves us feeling broken and abandoned, sever ties with the persons or circumstances that caused the drama, stress, worry, doubt, fear in our lives. Handle the transitions with care, for there will be moments of loneliness, vulnerability, and uncertainty, and allow space for purposeful recovery from emotional wounds. Now, in your chapters, you always have questions, reflective questions at the end. And so the question at the end that really struck a chord with me, and as it relates to that particular passage, was how are you caring for your emotional wounds? So how do you, when you're dealing with that, how do you, with physical wounds, you have to make sure it's covered, it's not getting messy, cover the dressing so it won't get infected again. So how do we keep the infection from seeping back into that emotional wound that we are trying to heal from?
Great question. I think the first thing that we must do to prevent, right? To prevent infection is to make sure that we examine our feelings. Like, that was one thing that I had to do. There was no need in me trying to move through the process before I could really answer some key core questions about how I was feeling and be honest. Because a lot of times we answer the question to convince ourselves, like we trying to rationalize and make it all right. But that's not that's not us being honest. And I think that if you answer the question mask, then you're bringing on infection because you never got to the core of the hurt. So that hurt is still there. But if you honestly look at for me, it was, what did I do to cause us to get here from our marriage, right? Because, Noelle, you knew the Lord, God did it for a reason. At least that part of my grief, I knew I was okay on that side. On this side, I couldn't really understand. Okay, well, I know I had a responsibility. You can't take, in a marriage, you can't take yourself out like, oh, I ain't do nothing wrong. I did something. I started something. So what was that? And I think for me, that was where I had to go to. That was my place to start so that I could prevent infection. And so I think that if we all do that, ask at that very core those key questions and be honest with the answers you give, because not being honest will bring on those infections, those extra hurts and pains that can be prevented.
Yeah, and so, gosh, there's just so many jewels in here. So when you talk about, asking those core questions and things like that, I always think about you, and you literally just talked about how when you spoke with Dr. Guns, he asked you how you were going to pivot from that. And so when you're dealing with the thought of infidelity over here, and you're dealing with the grief of your child, how did you, I don't want to say successfully pivot, but how were you able to manage that? Because like you said, you were grieving simultaneously. So how were you able to say, you know what, let me concentrate on this, or let me, be in my feelings about Noelle? Like, how were you able to really pivot, between those two spaces?
Right. I think it was always, I describe it in the book, those, they're called nesting boxes, or how they fit one into the other. It's like a big box, and then you nest another box, and then a smaller box in it. I kind of felt like I either had nesting boxes for both sets of grief, or I felt like I was always compartmentalizing, right? So when a wave of grief came over me, I literally had to stop and figure out, okay, now is this Noelle, or is this my marriage? And okay, I can't grieve about Noelle right now. I got to sit this over here because I've got to focus on my marriage, or I've got to focus on my marriage right here. Oh, I don't want to forget Noelle because she's still with me, but I've got to sit her over here. I've got to sit that over here. And I think that's when I hear parents, and when I hear husband and wives, and all of us, right, grieving different things now, that's what I kind of hear us doing. We have so many decisions that we have to make around these sudden losses that we are experiencing, is that you almost got to decide, okay, right now I got to focus on this set of grief experiences, or this one grief experience, and then at a different set of time, at a different point in time, or I've got to vacillate, right? I got to change, and I've got to focus my attention on over here, because it may affect different things in your life. I knew that I had to be very careful, because another quote that I got from a grief book said, don't move through the it wasn't, the word wasn't opportunity, but in essence she was saying, don't negate the relationship of your living children. Don't spend so much time in grief and wallow that you forget you have a living child. And when I read that, I almost like spazzed out, because I was like, oh my God, Corin, right? I wanted to make sure he was in high school. He was high school football. He was college. He was looking for colleges and things like that. And I promised myself that I would make sure that I was always present for him. And I think that as we continue to move through our processes of loss and grief and healing, that we too must remember I lost my train of thought. We must remember to be present for the thing that you need to be present for at that current time, and then vacillate and come back to that other place of hurt and pain when you're ready. Because sometimes you're not ready to handle certain types of grief. Some days I can look at Noel's picture and I'm okay. Other days I can't. I got to choose to be positive today. I got to choose. I'm not crying today. I got something to do. I got to be focused. It doesn't mean I've grown enough to realize it's not negating her, but going there in that sorrow today or whatever day isn't healthy for my healing.
Whew. Yeah. All right. So, like, I know the answer to the question I'm about to ask you. Mm-hmm. So when you were going through your process and you were trying to figure out how can I healthily deal with this in a healthy way, you decided to write the book. So why this particular book? Why now? And what do you want readers to get from it?
Well, writing the book, I feel like, some people write books for vendettas, to get back, I wanted to write the book. At first, it was therapeutic for me. I'm a writer. I love to write anyway. And so I wanted to capture the pain of my story, but also the process of my story. And so many times we hear of marriages, in particular clergy marriages of pastors and pastors' wives, deacons and deacons. We hear about the sensationalized details, but we never hear if they healed, if they're together, how did they do it. And furthermore, oftentimes the wife is saying, oh, well, she's sitting there all quiet and she's accepting everything. Actually, no, not for me. And I wanted to give voice to that. I wanted to open the door, open the window for the audience, the reader, to see this is exactly what these 18 months were like. From the time that, January of 17 to maybe a year or so ago, well, a little more than 2 years ago. That's what it was. That was my process. I didn't take any. Matter of fact, I wanted to leave some details out, and my coach was like, nope, you got to be real, because the reader's not going to believe it if they're going to be able. What she said? She said, no, they're going to see through you trying to hide something. So I really had to prepare myself, because I'm so much of an introvert. It doesn't seem like it. I really am an introvert. And I was like, okay, God, I really had to think about what I wanted to share and how I should share it. But then when she said, no, you need to share it as is, because that's what's going to help people. And so that's why I wrote it. Why now? I wanted it to be fresh. I didn't want to wait 5-10 years down the road, because look at what we're going through now. There are marriages that I've heard of, even just those who are peers of mine. We're not necessarily close, but I've heard of peers of mine who decided to walk away from marriages or find themselves, is this really what I want to do? And either a chapter has helped them personally or help the couple. Mm-hmm. And so I think, God's timing is perfect. And then you asked me a last question.
What do you want the readers to gain from the book?
The concept or idea that life after a series of losses is attainable. Mm-hmm. It is. It does it take work? Absolutely. Does it take mental fortitude? Absolutely. But it also takes the process that I went through and really taking on the transformative bereavement process really, really helped me to push through. I was looking for Becker's first name because I really wanted to give that, but I still don't see it. But here it is, Alyssa Bishop Baker. Yeah, Alyssa Bishop Baker. She's the one that wrote the framework for transformative bereavement. Had I not found that, I probably would have been stuck somewhere along the way. And so I'm thankful that I was able to find that, because it's not necessarily a known grief framework. It's known in that particular industry of counseling, but to those of us who are reading self-help books, I hadn't seen that before. And so I really wanted to incorporate that and use that as my framework of working through. And here, recently I've lost family members to even COVID, and my cousin said, Karen, I just don't even understand how you got through. And I was able to point to, well, this is how I got through. So, tap into this as you're dealing with your father's death. Tap into this as you're thinking about the loss of your business. Tap into this. And so I think it's been very helpful to see that, yes, you actually can thrive after going through a series of co-grief.
Mm-hmm. So chapter 9. Coded for intimacy. So not the physical part of honesty. Mm-hmm. How do you get to a place where you feel safe enough to allow people into that space when you're dealing or have dealt with grief? Because I know when you're having a bad day, you just want to go inside and you won't talk to nobody. You don't want nobody coming knocking on your door. Don't ask me for nothing. I don't have it. How do you? What is it? What did you do to allow people to back into that space after those simultaneous grief experiences?
I think what was so very important for me, when I got to the point where I realized, okay, I had to, after sitting there for, I guess it was about 12 months at that time, because I wasn't yet back at work yet. I took a whole 18 months off afterwards and stayed home. I had to start sorting through the ugliness of, oh, so that person really wasn't there for me. Like, I started analyzing my friendships and my relationships and my connections, and really started to pray for discernment about how I was going to create healthy boundaries. And that was hard, because I had to realize that I was used I was used to be a means to an end and not actually befriended. And I was like, So I had to really not become guarded, because guarded means that you're standing off. I feel like boundaries for me, creating those healthy boundaries meant that I had to realize that it's not good for me to reconnect with you for this particular reason. I'm not going to hate. I'm not going to be nasty. Hey, and move forward. There are a few that I did reconnect with, but it had what my husband and I call crucial conversations. It was a crucial conversation that I had to say, look, it's funny how when XYZ happened, you were there. But when I went through the silence, like, but yet now you want to be friends again. I had to have that conversation. And those kinds of conversations, you know that if you can't have the hard conversation, well, it's done anyway. But the meat of the content of the conversation helped me to realize, oh, okay, so this is actually what you were thinking and what you felt. But I also had to lay down my expectations. So a part of having a healthy boundary and having friendships or reconnections with friendships or even intimacy with even your spouse is being able to set expectations and say, look, this is what's going to be for me. This is for my sanity. This ain't about you. This is about Karen making sure that I stay in a healed place. Thus heal well. If I go back and allow you to take advantage of different parts of me, then I'm taking the Band-Aid off.
And you're recreating that emotional wound again and creating that connection. Yes.
And absolutely. It's like you're almost putting yourself back in the chrysalis to be reformed and built again when you were already forming your new self to move forward. So why do that? Why self-sabotage? Right? Go ahead.
So and maybe this is our round table talk of what my brown table talk. So you bring up a good point, and the self-sabotage part.
Mm-hmm.
When you are healing and trying to heal well, why do you think people do things like go back into that friendship that wasn't serving a purpose for them, or go back to that job that was just toxic? Why do you think we people go back to that space? Do you think because that's where we're comfortable? Do you think we are afraid? Do you think that we just, that we believe that's just it?
So why do we revisit things that we potentially should leave alone? But because we haven't fully gone through the process of analyzing or examining self. And if you don't have a circle of people, or maybe even one or two people who are going to be honest with you and tell you the things that you don't want to hear but need to hear, it's going to be difficult. I wish that when we were going through, particularly you think about marriage ministry, because I want to try to connect in as much of rethinking the church into it. It's unfortunate that we had to travel 4 hours away to find a pastor that would be supportive of our story. We were at our home church and couldn't get support. So we had to travel 4 hours away to a pastor to even get support and say, come on in. Let me help you heal. Let me help you heal your marriage. And so I think for me, that for both of us, that was very important, but that's also a part of our circle. I think so oftentimes if you don't have that sound voice in your circle, you just have yes men, then you're never going to get to a place of healing, of wholeness, because we all know about the crab barrel.
Crab in a barrel mentality.
Yeah, sometimes I've learned that it's hard for people to see you successful if they're not successful. So if that means I have to be silent or not be vocally supportive or be in person supportive of you when you're going through, then I'll be quiet, even though I know it may be to your detriment.
So going back real quick, because we are rethinking church. So why do you think a lot of ministries, churches in particular, don't address full on things like infidelity in the church? Because, like you say, there's always the hint of it around the clergyman, but no one's ever talking about it. We know it happened, but we don't know all the steps in between. So why do you think there is an aversion to actually discussing those topics, especially in the church?
I think we don't have a toolkit. When I think about it from an educational standpoint of view, being an educator, if I don't have the tools to successfully to manage a situation or tackle a situation, then I don't know what to do. So I'm not touching it. And I think that it's that, but it's also the elephant in the room is happening in other places. And so we just want to hide it and act like we're perfect. And we know that through this summit and through other conferences and things we're coming as we are, as people, real people with real experiences. And for those of us who are Generation Xers, we didn't necessarily hear that in church. So, even me as a PK, I'll say, my dad's a pastor, but my dad wouldn't have been able to at that time, 15 years ago, even when he was doing pastoral counseling, be able to pastor what I had going on, because that was outside of his range. And so, you have to find those John Guns of the world who are able to speak into that as a part of their toolkit. They've had some kind of experience or exposure or experience that they have some information to impart to help. And I think oftentimes we get so caught up in talking about it that we don't stop to see how we can help, or we do want to help, but if helping you means I got to come away from the women's ministry leaders that I hang with all the time, and what I may say to you will contradict what I told them. So it's so many different little pieces about it that I think when we talk about our church community that brings so many other layered pieces to it, is why there continues to be difficulty around discussing it. So you have your Black Love on Instagram, the couple who's come up with the Black Love shows and speaking about it that way. But how powerful would it be if we did the same thing and have those different types of, from the church's vantage point or perspective. I love the stories, but I'm like, it would be great, like you said, to have that same type of couples talking about how they went through it alongside their faith. How did their faith help them push through? Yeah. I think we have about maybe 5 more minutes before we give them a break to go on to the next session. So we have about 5 minutes to kind of wrap it up. And so what anything you have? You have one more question for us?
I have one more question. I come with the questions. So in terms of, again, the conference, Rethinking the Church, how do you envision your book play a part in ministry?
I'm glad you asked that question, because in chapter 10, the last chapter of the book, I talk about my legacy, what I want to come out of my process of co-grief, how I want to help. Who do I want to help? I just went through all those types of questions, and I birthed the Chrysalis, which is spelled differently, ministry, and putting the pieces together to really speak to wives, women who've gone through trauma in marriage. I really feel like there's not a lot of voices, or at least in my experience. And, unfortunately for us, it wasn't our first time around the bend with marriage issues. But, being able to have a safe haven, a safe place for wives to be able to have conversations about what they're going through, to determine, for some women, even for divorced women, there are so many divorced women, and I don't ever hear there being a conference or a summit or a meeting or a get up or tea time or something for those women who've gone through the loss of divorce. While I haven't actually thankfully gone through that piece, I think I lend so much to the voice of it because I know what it was like to make the decision. I think at that point I wanted to divorce, even though it didn't go through. I know what that feeling feels like. So how powerful would it be for me to lend my voice in support of whatever that woman chooses to do? So we have marriage ministry that talks about supporting the marriage, but we have women's ministry. But I really think we have to speak to today's woman, and today's woman is so much more multifaceted than married and single and divorced. I think there's just more to it than that. And I really wanted to leave this book going to something that's going to be fulfilling. And so I'm putting together those pieces of being able to provide content. I'm still in prayer about what kind of content that is, but I do know that I've decided, everybody's asking me to really talk about the healing process. Now that I've talked about the grieving process, I'm going to talk about how I actually healed. And so that's what I'm getting ready to pin next as I move forward. So I thank you for joining me on the platform with those questions. I thank those audience members who stayed with us for the 50 minutes to listen to me talk about the book. Thank you for your attention. Again, the picture, and I think the link is down below. It is on Amazon, Chrysalis, Coded to Thrive. I am Karen Bradford. And if by chance you want a softback copy, I do have some still available signed. Feel free to send me an inbox. I'll be more than happy to share it with you. Blessings to each and every one of you, and have a good evening. Take care.